Very good afternoon. Thanks for joining us and welcome to our lunchtime webinar, where we're going to talk about what does offsite construction mean for site managers. So this is going to be an event that will be between 45 and 50 minutes long. We'll invite you during the session to put some questions in the chat. The event is largely going to be a conversation between me and my expert guest, Dominic Coyne from BuildSpace UK. And I'll ask Dom to introduce himself in a minute or two. But what we're trying to find out today is, what does the site manager of the future look like? What skills and attributes, or somebody who wants to develop themselves into an expert in offsite construction and modern methods of construction, what's it going to look like? So I'll show a few slides in a moment. Before I do that, I'd really like to welcome Dominic from BuildSpace UK. Dom, would you like to introduce yourself and the business and a little about your experience?
Yeah. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody, and good afternoon, David. Thank you for thanks for having me and having a little chat through things. It's probably 2 or 3 years now, I think, since you and I first started talking about all things site management and all things offsite. So it's good that we're able to serve this today and have this conversation. BuildSpace, well, BuildSpace is, to many people, a recruitment business. We've been around about 12 years as a business, a standalone business, but before that it was another company that was bought. The history in offsite construction and probably predominantly in modular builds dates back since day one. So we have seen the changes in the sector from very much a factory focused small cabin style business to what we're seeing today, these massive sort of multi-story towers and super duper healthcare units and Ministry of Justice buildings and all kinds of crazy academy buildings. So it's changed massively, and there is as we look to the future and what that might mean for site management, then I think there's a lot more to come as well, so we can hopefully cover that today.
Yeah, thanks, Dom. We were actually talking before the event started that we've both been in the industry a long time, and me in particular. I think what I've seen is a construction industry that's really resisted change for many, many years. But we both feel that actually it's an industry that's embracing change and is going to change significantly in the next few years. So many of us in the industry at the moment will need to develop new skills, and that's hopefully what we're going to talk about with respect to site managers today. So if I may, I'll just start with a few scene setting slides. I guess before I do that, I should introduce myself. I'm Dave Emery. I'm a consultant with the Supply Chain Sustainability School. I've been an employee of the school for nearly a year now, but prior to that, they were clients of my business. So I've had a long-standing relationship with them. My background is in architecture, very much in housing and very much in off-site construction and BIM and digital construction. So those are my fields of enthusiasm in the industry. But I recently ran a little presentation, which I should have reran to the start, at the Offsite Expo last year, which set out a few of my thoughts around what skills a site manager might need in the future. Today's event, and indeed much of the work we do around offsite, was derived from a project that CITB commissioned us to create some learning materials a couple of years ago. The project was called Improving Skills in Offsite Construction, and we developed it along with CITB, the MTC Centre in Coventry, an organisation called NOCN. We always, when we're commissioned to create new learning material, reach out to find who are the best people in the industry who know these things already, and I have to acknowledge BuildSpace contribution, as well as the likes of Elliott, Premier, and many other McAvoy and other offsite manufacturers. And I, in my years, have spoken to a number of site managers who had experience of offsite, and I thought these two quotes were quite an interesting contrast, one to the other. The first chap, it's only on paper that it really comes together. It doesn't happen in real life. He was at what I would call the cynical end, and he'd obviously had some bad experience. On the contrary, another chap quoted here said it's got an absolutely fantastic future. So I think the jury is out amongst site managers about whether offsite construction is a good thing or not. But I think whatever your opinions about that are, you have to recognise that perhaps the role of the offsite site manager is going to be somewhat different from the traditional construction type site manager, with whom I've worked with very, very many over the last 40 odd years. I think if I could make a few recommendations to anybody considering becoming an offsite site manager, or even if you're not, but I would ask you just to think about trying to embrace change. I think change is coming, it's inevitable, it's unstoppable, and you either resist it or perhaps embrace it. And it's very tempting to resist change in all aspects of life, but I think in your work life in particular, when it's your heart and soul, it's your living, it's really difficult to want to change. But I think you need to recognize change and embrace it. And because the change is coming, I think you need to understand why that's happening. Why might your clients be asking you more and more to deliver innovative, modern solutions? It would probably do you a great deal of good to develop some knowledge around what a MMC and offsite actually is. And we offer plenty of other learning materials to help you on that journey. But the key thing is to understand what will be different in your job in the future. And finally, I'd say, well, actually, recognize this as an opportunity to become good, to develop some new skills, and actually make yourself more valuable to your customer or your employer. And when I talk about embracing change, we did some research. Some poor soul in our office found more than 160 reports that suggest that we as an industry need to change radically and embrace new ways of working. And this is underpinned by comparing our performance as an industry, the construction industry, with most other sectors. And in essence, our productivity has flatlined really for, it says 20 years in that survey. I know that if you extend the survey back to the start of my career in the 70s, the results are exactly the same. We're not terribly good at improving our productivity. So I just wanted to, at that point, pause for a minute. Don?
Yeah.
You try and find the best people for the new construction site in the future.
Yeah.
What do you look for in someone that you're possibly putting forward to an employer in these days?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, that has changed massively in the time that we have been involved in this space. So, I mean, if we hark back to the days when we first got involved, it was to be a sort of a factory foreman making these small sort of cabin-like boxes for MOD barracks. You know, the poor squaddies had these little box rooms that they used to have to shack up in, and it was a pretty straightforward production process. And the factory foreman or production foreman would often manage the install and take things to site. But obviously things have changed and times have changed, and in that time we've seen, you know, massive advances in design, big changes in terms of quality, and massive changes in terms of ambition, and people are going for some really challenging, complex projects. And with that, there's been a new skill set and a new expertise that has had to be to develop alongside that, and that's been great to see. Obviously, technology has played a part in that in recent years, but really it's been trying to find the transition spot from the production sort of factory approach of old, with the sort of, you know, principal contractor, tier one contractor thinking of today, and where does that harmonize in the middle? Because, you know, what we found in the past is that, you know, we've got a guy who builds a school in a traditional manner for £50 million for Morgan Sindall will not necessarily be the guy who can build a £20 million modular school and cross over straight away. You may have that major project thinking, you may have that mentality, but yeah, crossing over and trying to adapt to the modular way, it has been difficult. And I think we've seen problems with that over the years. So it's just trying to get that balance right.
You mentioned the use of more technology on site, and I want to park that for a moment because we'll come back to that. And there's no doubt in my mind that in terms of offsite construction, digital design and delivery actually underpin successful modular, but I don't want to frighten people off by talking too much about technology at the moment.
But we'll save that for later.
I'm thinking more about, when I think of the traditional site manager role, as I say, I've worked with many of them over the years, and I've always thought they do an amazing job right at the coalface. Yeah. They're responsible for the safety of the site. They're responsible for the productivity of the site, the welfare of people on site, the safe delivery and removal of large deliveries. It all seems to me an extremely highly pressurized job that requires a wide range of talents. But what strikes me about the offsite manager now is perhaps that he actually needs to be thinking beyond his own construction site into, as you touched on, the factory.
Yeah.
How do you see those sort of skills needing to develop?
It's massively important. As I say, as things have got bigger and more complex, because initially production, the factory went straight to site and the same guy followed it all the way through. Because it was a smaller, perhaps less complex, dare I say it, unit at the time, it was easier to do that and one could move with the other. But as things got bigger and more complex, then the two became detached. And so you would have a breakdown in communication. It was very much an us and them. The production facility would look after their product and take pride in that. And once it got on the back of a truck and went off to site, then it was somebody else's problem and they would pick it up at the other end. And so there was that breakdown in communication. But companies recognise that, our clients have recognised that over a period of time, and the communication lines between the two have got so much better now that we've seen that improvement come, and in terms of delivery and quality on site, that's increasing all the time on the back of that collaboration between the two different departments.
Yeah. Just pausing our conversation for a moment to the audience, I forgot to mention there is a Q&A, a question and answer facility. If you look on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, if you've got any questions for Dominic that you'd like him to answer either during or towards the end of the session, please type any questions that you've got in that Q&A box. We'll also ask you a little bit later on for some feedback from this session. My colleague Naomi's online and we'll put down a link for that very soon. So in terms of the site managers that you have been recruiting over the last few years, Dominic, do you find now that there is a scarcity of what I would call an offsite site manager, or are people actually developing those skills?
Well, that's a good question in itself. There is definitely a major shortage of quality site managers in offsite construction. That much is clear. We recognised that some time ago, and obviously that was where our interest with you guys at the supply chain school came along. And obviously we've helped help you with insights and inputs and some content and case studies for the CPD courses that we've been able to put together between ourselves. So that's been a starting point, and it's, there's no next generation of modular build site manager or offsite site manager coming through. So it is about sort of a transfer of skills and crossing people over from a main contractor, a tier 1 contractor background. The CPD courses have helped with that and helped transition people through. But the question I've had and the question I've posed, I'm not the absolute oracle on these matters, nor do I profess to be. But we do surround ourselves with the best construction directors and managing directors. As a business, we don't really work as a typical recruitment company. So we sort of partner firms, and we act as an extension of their business in terms of managing all of their recruitment. By virtue of that, we've got some good relationships, and so I picked their brain and said, what's the best site manager? What is the best profile of site manager that you have in your business? And, has that come through the ranks, through the factory and into site management? Or has it been somebody that you've been able to successfully convert over from a Galliford Try or a Wilmot Dixon or whoever it may be? And there's been
interestingly, just to interrupt there, I've had conversations with lots of site managers who've begun this transition to their new offsite world. And when I try and ask their thoughts and advice, inevitably they're quite apologetic because they don't feel they've got enough experience yet as an offsite site manager to be able to speak authoritatively. And I think that just shows what a new role that is emerging is there now.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes back to your earlier slides, which we skimmed over. I mean, one of the points you made was, you know, if you get a guy from a Balfour Beatty who's been building schools all his life, I mean, he's the guy who says that these modules don't work. You know, he's the traditional build guy and is the ultimate cynic. But, you know, when you do find these people cross over, and you do have to, you know, not everyone does, but when you do find people cross over, if you get it right, they, I think, are where we want to be. People who aren't daunted by the size and scale of these projects as they get bigger, but who also are open to that mindset, that change, and will embrace that change, so they can cross over and adapt quickly. Because, as I say, if you go in there with your eyes closed and with your blinkers on, thinking this isn't the future, then there'll be a rude awakening.
I think it's a good time if I do another quick screen share.
Yeah.
So for people in the audience, we use a little tool that you can get to on your mobile phone. And I think this will be a bit of fun for you to be working in the background. So if you pick up your mobile phone and go to a browser and go to menti.com, we've put in a couple of little questions that you might want to ponder and type your answers in completely anonymously on your mobile phone. So if you go to menti.com, and you will see a code number at the top of my screen, which is 39997962. You will find two questions on your mobile phone that you can answer. And one, we ask you to jot down what you think might be the benefits to a site manager of working on an offsite project. Is there something that will make their life easier, more likely to deliver a successful project and save money, or so on? And the other question you will find are, what might be some of the risks that you as an offsite manager would perceive if your client wants you to work on an offsite project? So there's a bit of a risks and benefits exercise going on there. And please feel free to type in any thoughts on that in the background while we're talking. So it's menti.com, and the code is 39997962. And I'll just leave that. There we go. I can see somebody successfully got onto that. So we'll come back to that in a minute or two. If anybody can't find that, please just jot us a note in the chat, and we'll come back to it. So my experience, Dom, when because I've been talking to the industry at various events for the best part of 20 years, and I've always talked about things that are actually invoking change, whether that's DFMA or Offsite or BIM. Yeah. And I've had rooms full of people in various workshops, and my sense is that most people, or a good proportion, are willing to accept change, but there is a hardcore that always resists. And in my experience, it's always the how can I describe it, the more elderly, right, more aged, more experienced, who resist change. Yeah. Have you got a sense of how that's working in site management? Is it the old guard that resist and the newer, younger, or is that cliche?
I don't know. I mean, it's you know, with age comes experience, and and certainly quality. You know, people that perhaps you could argue the youth of today want everything to go that bit faster. And again, you know, the quality of trades and the quality of finish, which is imperative when it comes off a factory and then has to be finished off. You know, maybe that is lost. But you know, my dad does his online banking on his phone now. That was impossible 3 years ago. You know, it was never going to happen. It's a miracle. So I don't think age is any barrier. I think if a good site manager is a good site manager and is open to that bit of change, then yeah, anything's possible.
I suppose we need to touch on technology. Certainly, I knew someone who developed an app for, I think it was taking snagging lists on site using a mobile phone. Yeah. And he was having great trouble selling this app. But he said to me that the greatest change in the mindset on construction sites came when somebody invented the Betfred app on the mobile phone. Once a site operative could put his bets on from a mobile device, he lost his fear of technology. So I don't know how true that is. But I mean, there is some amazing technology out there at the moment and coming forward. I think you've had some experiences with some of these new technologies.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned some of the snagging stuff that comes through. So there are a lot of bolt-ons now in terms of field view and all that kind of stuff where you can keep an eye on progress. But one of the most exciting, there's a couple of chaps. I actually play footy with a few of them, and I've seen their product develop over the last couple of years. And there's a couple of guys who were structural engineers, and they have a product called Index, and it's basically a digital solution. But it starts, they were working on crossrail jobs years ago, and there'd be 500 people doing an induction in the morning, and they were thinking, this is ludicrous. And then there'd be another 500 in the afternoon. There's too many people to, too many different things. So they started off a tool that would help with a pre-enrollment beforehand, and would give people a sort of digital passports as they go on site, and then they can build that up. Anyway, it's morphed into all different kinds of things. And now you can manage pretty much everything in the palm of your hand. So if you're a project manager, you've got every single site report and every single site diary. You've got all the drawings that you need to see and more. You've got timesheets from the staff. You've got health and safety stats. You've got sustainability credentials. Pretty much everything is in real time for everybody on the supply chain to see. And I think, going forward, if we look at the current site manager and where we are today, yes, there has been an improvement in technology, and site managers are becoming a little bit more savvy. But I think as we go a bit further down the line, if this is a new a product that's in circulation now, the next gen products in 5 years' time are going to make life that bit more efficient on site. And I think it's going to help with lean management. I don't think it's going to massively reduce the number of people needed on site, but it would mean that a project manager could manage multiple sites at once. Head office can always see what's going on in real time. I think for modular especially, most of these places are in Hull, or the factories in East Yorkshire, wherever it may be. And if they've got jobs in Cornwall, now they've got that better overview of the project and what's going on there. I think human interaction is absolutely imperative on site. The role of a site manager and a site management team is mission critical. It creates a culture. It creates process, it sets standards. I think it's really important, but technology can only improve that, and it'll probably get people out the cabin a bit quicker in the morning, and that off bet fed a bit quicker too.
I agree with you that human interaction is extremely important on a construction site. I was privileged to visit something called a simulation centre in Coventry University a few years ago, which was built with European money. And it was a huge conference centre in which there was a room where site managers were trained and tested. So it was a huge IMAX cinema effect in which was projected a digital image of a construction site. Oh, wow. And the site manager was given 2 hours to perform 6 tasks. So we actually had a little Elliott porter cabin in this big room, oh, wow, and a phone and a set of drawings. Yeah. But then they used actors to bring problems. So each actor would come in with a problem. The first one would be the actor who was the health and safety executive guy that would take him out into this virtual construction site, and he would start to ramp up the problems. And the site manager would get more and more agitated. And it was to test how well he could multitask. And I don't think I was supposed to see the end result video of what happens when the top comes off a site manager's head, but it's not a pretty sight. But it just emphasized for me the importance of having those personal skills on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's actually understanding how much information you can have at any one time about what's going on. Yeah. And I think in a post-Grenfell world as well, we need to understand the importance of this digital data throughout that construction and delivery process.
Exactly. As I say, communication is paramount. It's better for health and safety and better for performance in terms of, delivery and quality. And if everybody's living in real time and everybody's got everything at their disposal, then I think, digital technology and everything that goes with it is definitely going to help us move forward. And if you think about industries, farmers on the back of tractors these days with technology, they know every time there's a new spud crop, they've got a new bit of tech to help them with it. I think construction's been a late adopter, but I think it's getting there, and I think I'm looking forward to the next 5 years to see where we get to.
No, nobody loves shiny new software more than me, but I'd be the first to admit that actually there sometimes can be a surplus of data. I read somewhere recently that we'll produce more digital data in the next 3 years than we produced in the next 30 years. And I think it's really important that we develop tools that are actually understandable and useful and simple to use and actually give genuine results and progress to the site manager.
User friendliness is definitely going to be the way. If it becomes too convoluted, we are trying to sort of, re-educate and train a bit more sort of technical nous on site. Then, it needs to be as friendly as possible to help us transition across. But, as I say, if my old boy, if he's doing his online banking on his mobile phone, then there's hope for everybody.
I'm going to nip across to our survey and just see what the audience feel are some of the advantages of an offsite solution. All these are anonymous, so it's really interesting to see the cross section. So reduced time on site, I think is probably a very good one, and it's probably fairly simple to demonstrate that, but with a huge caveat that I think an offsite site probably requires more detailed planning. Would you say, Dom?
Yeah, 100%. So, with the amount of times we've built project teams out, and then there's been a planning constraint at the last minute, it's certainly more so than traditional builds. The planning process definitely takes longer, but it's certainly worth it when it gets going.
I've worked on many contaminated sites. I'm in the industrial West Midlands, and there have been numerous sites where we've used remediation techniques that have sterilised the site for months at a time. Bioremediation, injecting bugs into the ground, can sterilise the site for 6 months. Well, of course, with an offsite solution, even though you're remediating the site, that doesn't mean you can't start the manufacturing process in the factory, so that when the site's ready, the construction will be much faster.
Yeah, so one problem you can have there is overproduction. So sometimes, you do have those planning delays, with the facilities of companies being so, they're so busy at the moment. Then if there is a 2-year planning delay, you've got a yard full of boxes or modules that are hanging around as the production line's going crazy,
I think I'd go further. I think it's almost inevitable that if you're having volumetric modular buildings delivered to site, the rate of productivity in the factory and on the site are invariably going to be different. And somewhere, someone's going to have to store boxes. And if that's you manipulating those on your site, you'll certainly need some patience and talent and well-honed skills.
Absolutely.
Having said that, the next one down on that list, future-proofing your job, I absolutely agree. That's probably the essence of what we're talking about today, isn't it, Dom?
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree with that one wholeheartedly.
And reduced waste, I think, that's, we as a construction industry are notoriously wasteful in certainly in terms of our materials, but also in terms of rework. And I love to tell the story of an event I went to, which was a presentation by the production director at Toyota GB, and they produce 2,900 cars per day in Derby, and they use lean process and reduce waste wherever possible. And he asked us to guess how many skips they needed at the end of each shift to take away the waste materials. And of course, the answer he claimed was 0, because they don't waste anything. And of course, if you think of the levels of waste in construction, typically, depending on whose report you believe, between 25 and 30%, you'd need enough skips to take away about 900 cars a day in waste.
Yeah, absolutely. It's massive.
Linear schedule of works, less storage on site as can be installed straight away. Any thoughts on that, Tom? I think I
agree with that. Again, it's all about getting lifted and installed correct. If we've got our groundwork sorted and everything's agreed, weather can take hold when it comes to the installation, but it's only a minor delay, and that can run through for sure. Yeah,
that's an interesting one in the middle at the bottom there. Not being constantly interrupted by staff, allowing time to be used more effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. Well, we know about getting interrupted by staff, but there's procurement and programs for sure. It definitely speeds up the process. In terms of build time, we've got a client of ours that we do a lot of work with, a company called Untitled Construction, and they built the world's tallest modular build tower. When we first went to site with them a number of years ago, we were looking at the 3 or 4 major developments that were going on in Croydon where they built these towers, and they're now on the 3rd tower while others are finishing off their first, and they're taller still. So in terms of, in terms of building program out and building at speed, then, the world's tallest modular build tower goes up 3 times faster than a traditional build.
And for me, I think that sums up some of these advantages, many of which are perfectly valid. But if I were a site manager and I was offered the opportunity to work on a site that potentially could offer a better finished building in terms of its quality,
it's
on a more certain program, more or less risk of cost variations, why wouldn't I want to have that opportunity to deliver that to my customer?
I think it's all about the pre-construction. As much as we're talking about site management today, the effort that goes into pre-construction in off-site construction is massive. So if you get that right and you consider all eventualities, your design spot on, your factory production is excellent, then you give yourself a great chance of when you do actually go to site of delivering this top quality product and doing it on time and in budget.
Thanks, Dom. I was really pleased that the audience had found so many positives in it. I'll just flick forward to the next slide. I'm not sure if that's popped up on your phone. If you haven't already had a go, name some risks of off-site construction for you as a site manager, and we'll see whether it's the risks or benefits get more comments. I'm delighted that one of our audience, who I know well, who I will spare his embarrassment, has entered something in the Q&A, but it's a personal comment rather than a question. That did you not realise, Dom, black polo necks are for architects only? Fashion faux pas.
I do apologise. I should have.
So I just want to. I'm just going to pop back, if I may, and we'll go back to that little PowerPoint. I just wanted to go on to a couple of other things. We've looked, I think, at the fact that the construction site is probably inevitably going digital, and both we and Dominic at Buildspace can help you with understanding some of the issues around digital construction. But I also think it's worth looking at this from the client's point of view. What might they be expecting from you on their off-site construction site? And I think, clients have always got this initial choice to make, haven't they? That it's the time, cost, quality dilemma. You can only ever have 2 out of those 3 characteristics normally. But so many customers have different drivers. So, we know the company that supplies the vast majority of McDonald's restaurants, for example, and their speed is very much of the essence. The revenue that goes through a typical McDonald's restaurant is huge every day. So the sooner it can be built, the sooner they can generate huge revenues. But at the same time, quality is also paramount to someone like McDonald's. Whereas perhaps if you were the British Red Cross in a disaster zone that needs some urgent temporary shelter for people affected by a crisis, it could be that speed is essential, but cost has to be low and the quality isn't necessarily important. Department for Education, again, school buildings, we all know, quality paramount, and the fact that we need to deliver them usually within only a few weeks a year kind of makes the time process quite important as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So different clients, different requirements, different motivations, different drivers, and I think as a site manager, you need to be aware, would you say, Dom, of what's paramount to your client?
If you look back and just think about the Nightingale project last year, when we were in the year before, when we were in the height of the pandemic, and we're obviously, we had a massive bed shortage in hospitals around the country. The speed and tempo of some of those rollouts was just it was off the charts. It was so busy and yet so slick. Premier Modular did a wonderful job with the works that they did. And you know, the quality, you know, British Red Cross in the field perhaps doesn't need to be as A1 in terms of finish as at Nightingale Hospital, but to deliver that and roll it out in breakneck speed was a great effort.
Yes, one of my sons-in-law was on one of the delivery teams for a Nightingale hospital, and he didn't see his wife, my daughter, and her kids for some weeks, and he was really delighted when a few months later he was disassembling them, having not seen a single bed used, but that's another story. So I think, you know, as a site manager, you probably need to increase your knowledge of what MMC, modern methods of construction and offsite, actually really mean. And we have run numerous workshops over the last few years, and however many people are in the workshop, I always like to run a little quiz about the different categories of offsite construction, such as shown here, from volumetric modular through to two-dimensional, you know, typically trusses and floor beams and so on, and all 7 categories. And I can tell you now that not one single workshop has every attendee got every question about the categories correct. So it's really worth spending a little bit of time in understanding the different systems that actually together make up modern methods of construction. And again, we can help you with that. And I think it's also worth remembering that, you know, when we talk about offsite, it isn't always about volumetric modular 3D boxes. You know, very many large projects such as this one comprise a number of different systems and methods, from precast facade panels to pre-manufactured service risers and so on. So there can be a whole range, can't there, Dom, of systems coming onto your site.
We're working with a company called Mid Group at the moment. We've worked with them for a long time. They're ex-Langer Road guys by and large, but they've got a commercial office building in Shoreditch, and which is being built at the moment, a black and white building. And yeah, it's completely timber, the whole thing, and I mean, it's amazing to see. You know, it's going to have a bamboo clad around it, the whole thing, but it's completely made off site and just slipped into place, and off we go.
Mid Group actually have just become partners of the school, and I'm about to deliver their welcome session, which we're delighted about. But one of the innovations that they have is what we call a platform-based approach, which is to look at creating buildings using a minimal number of standard components. And by mixing those components in various ways, you actually get quite a lot of opportunity to create unique buildings. And they tell great stories of where using their system and driving out waste, driving down costs, and increasing the speed of delivery, it's actually unlocked projects that were otherwise economically not viable.
Absolutely.
I'm going to go to one of the questions for you, Dom. Are there any health-related drives to emphasise on off-site manufacturing rather than profit and delivery of the profit of the project? Are there any health-related drivers to emphasise on off-site manufacturing rather than profit and delivery of the project?
Health related, I mean, that can only refer back to factory conditions, I'm guessing. I'm guessing, you know, in the factory environments, conditions are improving all the time. Again, I can only speak, I'm not a massive expert on this, but I can tell you what my factory tours are looking like. In days gone by when we first started, we went to have a look at some tired old caravan production facilities, shall we say, in East Yorkshire. And then just before Christmas, we had a chance to go and see Legal & General's new facility. I mean, that is what a wonderful space that is in terms of the concern and the managing the welfare of their staff, the space they've got, the equipment that they use, and the thought process that goes into looking after the workforce is second to none. Yeah.
I don't have the stats to hand, but I'm almost certain that we could demonstrate that working in a factory environment is far, far safer than working on a construction site. Yeah. And I don't doubt that because of off-site modular process, we'll see fewer on-site staff. And some of the innovations you were telling me about Dom, in the technical world will also reduce the number of staff
I
on
think
site.
so. Yeah, I think the nature of a modular build site, when it is largely a groundworks job with a unit that is then dropped by installation. These things are 60, 70, 80% complete now when they arrive at site. So in terms of the number of people on site to see a project through, then you're probably just by headcount alone, rather than anything else, you're probably working in a far safer working environment once you're on site as well.
Yeah. So I think if you are an off-site site manager, you'll probably find yourself working with fewer people and having fewer of those personnel issues that we've touched on. But I think actually your responsibilities.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
responsibility is higher, so the spotlight shines that little bit brighter. Whereas
That's right.
If you're working for Lend-Lease or Mace on a commercial office block in the city, and it's a £200 million job, it's like an ant farm with bodies everywhere. Whereas in terms of site management, and someone will look after a section or a floor or a block or whatever it may be. But on the site manager or an off-site job, the buck stops with him or her, for that matter, increasingly so, which is great. And so yeah, there's a lot more spotlight on it. Some would say it's an easier job, but I'd say it's definitely more difficult. But yeah, there's definitely some opportunity there.
Yeah, I agree. Great question. Someone agrees with me. The product platform is a strategy to bring cost-efficient processes to the offsite industry. But how do you start applying the concept in companies that have never used it before? Tainara, that's a really good question, and it's one that I think we would probably answer in a different workshop from the one about site managers.
Yeah.
But if you drop me a David at supplychainschool.co.uk, I'll talk to you about perhaps some of the other events coming up where that'd be a more appropriate forum for replying for that. But I suppose in essence, though, you have actually hit on one of the key difficulties, which is how do you invoke change in a company? How do you invoke change in a business? And for me, the best way that we can do that in the school is to help showcase projects that have been successful through innovation and change and doing things differently. And I think, Dom, you got a few case studies, hadn't you? Few recent projects you'd come across. Do you want to touch on one or two of those?
Again, we're going over some old ground, but the projects are getting bigger and bigger, and there's no question of that. And you know, with the clients that we work, every year they're scaling and scaling. So, you know, whereby we used to start off with a £2 million school extension, you know, we're now looking at projects that are 100 million plus, and so that's scaling all the time. But there's been some highlight jobs that we've helped support over the last couple of years and build teams for. The Premier Modular job at Hinkley Point was massive. That was a sort of resi catering commercial space that obviously Hinkley Point's going like the clappers anyway, and they needed to get as many people as possible installed on site, which is in the middle of nowhere, as quickly as possible to keep on with project programs. So the deadlines were scary, the project deadlines were scary, and that was delivered well, and it was hats off there. We've worked with Elliott's on some of their biggest schools. They were the first to start doing the biggest of academies that were all 25 million plus. We've supported a lot of their schools. We've worked with MAR, Module AR, who we partner with, and they are doing some really tricky residential housing. A lot of people have tried resi and a lot of people have got it wrong, but they've got their model right for both private and social, and that's going well. We work with Eco Modular, who've nicked a few decent sized healthcare projects on top of their education stuff. So things are getting bigger. The diversity of appetite in the market is increasing. So, you know, although it used to be a lot of public sector works, and you know, the government was driving that change with sustainability in mind and cost as well. We're looking at things like big data centers now, and aspects of distribution centers where, you know, the likes of Amazon or Google or whoever it may be are coming and looking at off-site and module components to put into their huge facilities. So I think it's, you know, it's got universal appeal now, and that's only going to get bigger.
Yeah, I think you're right. I also think that, you know, increasing the knowledge of site managers around this area is great, but it's not just site managers who need to learn and understand things differently.
Yeah.
Very much clients need to be educated, although, as you say, some really big names that now are seeing the advantages.
Yeah.
We've had Nigel Osteen from Hawkins Brown, who's just had to drop off the call. Their practice in terms of architecture really ahead of everyone else in understanding this manufacturing mindset. So I think if you as a site manager can gain some of these skills and knowledge, actually you can help shape the industry. You can help your company and your company's clients understand the offsite world a lot better, and therefore help deliver more successful projects.
Yeah. And if you look at
one of the things that
if you look at the likes of Berkeley Homes, you know, they're seen as the biggest developer in London and the southeast. They're obviously setting up this super duper facility in Essex. You've got Telford Homes who are going for it. They've set up a great facility. Skanska have set up Buckluck in the last couple of years. So, you know, the bigger traditional tier one main contractors and developers, they are all going down the offsite route or complementing that with. Yeah, when people like that start to take note, then it's headed in the right direction.
Absolutely. There's some huge investment in this, isn't there, in the UK at the moment?
Absolutely.
I'm just going to draw your attention, members of the audience, please, to the chat. My colleague Naomi's put a link in there for you to fill in the feedback form. Dom and I are going to continue chatting for a few minutes more. But it's really important in the school that we get as much feedback as possible. Whether you liked it or not, please do say and be honest and open with us. It's really important that we understand when we're doing things well and when we're doing things not so well. So if you would click on that link and take a few minutes. Meantime, I think it'd be interesting, Dom, just for me to share the screen and go back to our Menti poll to see what people think might be the risks to a site manager rather than the benefits. So let's have a look at these. Potentially less control. I think that's a really interesting one.
Yeah, communication again, isn't it? You know, right hand and left hand for factory and delivery team. As long as that communication's there, and you know, going back to our point of the future, if the tech and the digital solutions are in place, then that should harmonise even further and keep that communication going. It'll keep that control there.
I can fully understand the fears of a site manager who could possibly spend weeks and weeks on his site waiting on someone else to deliver something. It's a major part of that project. That must be a real worry.
Yeah.
The loss of quality is a really interesting one. And if this was an interactive workshop, I would ask the person who wrote that actually to converse with us and explain that a little bit more. It is generally accepted that the quality of a modular unit in a factory is comparable to, if not better than, something that's assembled on site. So I'm really interested in that loss of quality. Whether that is someone's bad experience, I don't know. But I'd love you to attend our next workshop and talk that through with us. Potential delays in delivery. Again, this I'm sure is a fear of the site manager, that if the factory doesn't perform as intended or as expected, that can massively impact your project. And it's not as though in a traditional construction site, you might find another gang of bricklayers to speed production. You really can't do that very easily, can you, in an offsite situation?
We've seen that with materials as well recently. You know, if you've got your groundworks in place and everything's sorted, when there was that sort of materials crisis last year that people spoke of, it slowed down. No steel meant that the module production slowed massively. Yeah.
And I can't go through all of these with the time available, but I see one that says supply chain capacity causing delays. And I have to say, the capacity of the industry to deliver is absolutely fundamental to the success of the future of the offsite industry. We do have this almost catch-22 situation where it's really difficult for people to invest and to ramp up production without the demand from the customers. But in the interim, the customers are concerned that there aren't enough reliable manufacturers in the industry to satisfy their clients. So I think somebody there has hit a really key potential problem in the industry.
Yeah.
And another one my eye is drawn to is the errors may be replicated over multiple modules. You're absolutely right. And some of the modular projects I've worked on, actually we've built physical prototypes from what we thought were highly accurate BIM models, and it's not until you actually build the thing. I'm ashamed to say that you can see some problems there.
Just going back, Dave, sorry, Dave, just going back to that Tide project, there were 1,520 modules in that town, and it was deemed BREEAM excellent. I mean, they just sat perfectly, and the quality was A1 first time. So, I mean, that's an achievement in itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is replicated unit size.
And another one that's drawn my eye is that late design changes. And the lead time to change, that's absolutely critical. In some ways, I'd go so far as to say it's really not possible to change design beyond a certain point. And I also think in terms of the site manager's role, you need to communicate any changes that occur on the site back to the factory, as well as the other way around.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I also think, the site manager potentially is going to have to resolve some interface issues where you've got factory built components and things that are built to fractions of a millimeter coming out onto a hostile construction site. I think some of those interfaces could be quite difficult.
Yeah.
So I'm going to come away from the Menti poll. I think what we've covered today is having a look at the industry as it is now, and hopefully its propensity towards change. I think it's going to create a need for new skills, certainly amongst site managers. I think those changes are going to be wide-ranging, so you're going to have a much broader range of knowledge and a much broader responsibility, I think, on your site. And you're inevitably going to come in contact, I think, with some new technologies. But I also think that, as the site manager, the person on the coalface who understands how things go together, the potential to learn these new skills and to become a thought leader and a great practitioner in offsite construction is really worthwhile. So, Don, do you want to just talk a little bit more about BuildSpace and some of the services you can offer?
Yeah, no, listen, it's not a sales pitch by any stretch of the imagination, so I'm not going to go into ultimate sales drive. But we're passionate about offsite construction and have been for many years. We've forged relationships with the biggest contractors in the markets who are long-standing, and we understand their business. We understand the challenges they've faced over a period of time, and we've sort of moved with those times as well. So, yeah, if there's anybody who's keen to have a conversation about a future or a role in construction management, site management, in offsite construction, we'll be happy to help. And also on the flip side, if there's anybody who's working for a contractor in a sort of management position who'd like to talk about some of the solutions and some of the ways that we can partner and buddy up with you and help deliver the world-class teams, then we're here to help.
Okay. Thank you, Dom.
Thank you.
And finally, I'm pleased that my colleague Naomi has dropped in the chat a link to our next offsite workshop, which is actually Offsite for Site Managers workshop, whereas today has been what we would call a lunch and learn, a webinar, more of a broadcast with two of us speaking to a mute audience, as it were. Our workshops are far more interactive. They're far fewer in number of attendees, but they're very much a two-way dialogue where I will work on that occasion with a real expert site manager who is employed by one of the biggest developers in the UK, who've currently got a preference for offsite construction. I'd go so far as to say they're one of the country's leading offsite developers, and he's a site manager and project manager, and he'll be working with me to deliver a much longer 2.5 hour to 3 hour interactive workshop on the 16th of March. So please think about booking on that, where I can at that event have more opportunity to engage with the audience and discuss some of the issues. Meanwhile, I'd like to thank everybody for attending. like to thank Naomi, my wingman today, for putting in the links to the workshop and the feedback forms. And if you haven't done that, members of the audience, please do fill in the feedback form. And of course, thanks to Dominic Coyne of BuildSpace UK for joining me on what I think has been a fascinating broadcast. Thank you very much, Dom.
No, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having us. We've really enjoyed it, and yeah, I hope people have taken some positive stuff away.
Thanks very much. And with that, I'll draw the session to a close. Thanks and goodbye.
Cheers. Goodbye.